I've been a part of the cartoon community for a while now, and one of my favorite aspects of said community is whenever someone finds this weird little thing out there, they signal boost and tell everyone. It gives me a bunch of new things to watch. It could be this unsung movie that came out in another country that the mainstream is only vaguely aware of, or this show that never got its own dues because it was abused by its network, or was on a more obscure network that most people have never even heard of. Of course, this does have its limits. Level 1, we have people talking about obscure, underrated gems that really aren't all that under the radar. The obscure, not obscure, I like to call them. The Irish folklore trilogy is a good example of this. Song of the Sea, Secret of Kells, and Wolfwalkers. They're technically obscure. Like, you can go up to a random stranger on the street, they probably wouldn't have heard of them, at least here in the United States. But if you're watching a YouTube channel about animation, you've probably seen all three of those films and love them. That being said, many people in the cartoon community do take this to the next level. They talk about things that most people, even in the cartoon community, might only vaguely know about. You know, because they grew up with them, or it's this random show that just piqued their niche interest. Jordan Fringe's most successful series is basically all about that, talking about these shows that you probably only have vaguely heard about, like Kappa Mikey or Edgar and Ellen. However, there is a level of obscurity that's deeper than that, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Have you ever noticed that when people are talking about underrated animation, it's always either a movie or a show, with it very occasionally being a short film or an internet animation that has taken off. It's always one of those four things. And the first thought you probably have, well, what else is there besides movies, shows, internet shorts, or short films? And the answer is tons. Like, a lot. For an example, some of the most expressive and experimental animation that you will ever see comes from music videos. A lot of commercials have capitalized on the world of animation and go so much harder than they have any right to do. There is a lot of cool stuff out there for those who have the eyes to see it, especially if you don't want to just stick to the mainstream television and theaters. You've seen SpongeBob on the TV. You've seen him in the theater. Have you ever seen him in action theater at Paramount Park?
If I'm going to catch Patrick, I must first think like Patrick.
These are the kind of hidden obscurities that I live for. The arcane secrets of the world. Things that don't immediately click with your average Joe. And while we'll get to those other subjects eventually, today we're going to tackle one of my special interests. Video games. Believe it or not, video games as a medium have a whole host of exclusive animation that is desperate to find an animation audience. Beautiful works by even some of the most famous animators and studios in the world have simply gone underappreciated simply because they're trapped in a medium that most people don't immediately think of. There are quite a few Studio Ghibli rankings out there in the wild. How many of them have Ni no Kuni in them? Or better yet, how many times do people talk about how great of an animator Don Bluth was throughout the 1980s without really mentioning Dragon's Lair? The year was 1983, and arcade games look like this. Simple pixels running around a maze and shooting other pixels. But in the midst of 1,000 space shooters, you had this.
Dragon's Lair, a fantasy adventure where you become a valiant knight on a quest to rescue the fair princess from the clutches of an evil dragon.
An arcade machine that was playing quality animation. Animation that didn't quite look like anything else at the time. It was made by Don Bluth, immediately after his directorial debut, The Secret of NIMH, which had aired the year prior. In the coming years, he would be seen as one of the most respected animators of the 1980s, as the only one who could beat Disney at their own game, with films like All Dogs Go to Heaven and American Tail, and especially The Land Before Time. I think everyone grew up with at least one of these films in their library and saw it a billion times. Land Before Time was that film for me. And yes, I do know that Dragon's Lair isn't the most obscure thing in the world. There was buzz about a Kickstarter campaign a few years, fucking hell, a decade ago, about a full-on Dragon's Lair movie. But even with that being said, Dragon's Lair, the arcade game, isn't usually in the discussion of this man's greatest works. In animation circles, I tend to hear more love for Bartok the Magnificent than Dragon's Lair. Full disclosure though, Bartok the Magnificent was my childhood. I do have to guess that Dragon's Lair doesn't get a lot of attention as an animation classic because it's a video game. And in terms of being a video game, as in picking up the controller and trying to get to the end, Dragon's Lair is an abominably terrible video game. Can you say QuickTime events? That's everyone's favorite gameplay mechanic, right? If you've never played Dragon's Lair before, I'll describe it for you. It is an interactive movie. Animated cutscenes play out, and if you don't press the right button at the right time, then you die. and you'll need to insert a full $1 to play again, if you're doing this on the arcade version. And this is $1983. They're a lot more valuable. That alone doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world. Arcade cabinets were notorious for munching quarters, especially because even from this distance, you could see that the animation quality is stellar. I'd pay $1 to see that. The problem with the gameplay is that the game doesn't tell you the buttons that you need to press, if you're playing on the default arcade mode at least. If you're going into Dragon's Lair blind, it's definitional trial and error gameplay. Worse than a lot of other arcade games. There's about a total of like 10 minutes of animation. How do you make money with that? Force the players to die again and again and again until they memorize what they're supposed to do. Digital versions, such as the ones that you can get on Steam, do have modes that will actually tell you the buttons that you're supposed to press, when you're supposed to press them. A lot of old hats would call that cheating. I call it making the game fucking playable. Even then, with this quality of life update, as a game, it's still a hard recommendation. You can't make the core heart of this anything more enthralling than press the right button at the right time or you die. You know, it's the stereotype of a video game that comes from people who have never played a video game before. And as such, as a game, it's not a good game. However, if you separate it from its video game roots and you take this as a movie, it becomes something else entirely. Dragon's Lair at that level is fucking art. The story is quite simple. Almost, well, Disney. On the surface at least, it's about a knight saving a princess from a dragon. An all too familiar premise. As we should all know at this point, Don Bluth was unsatisfied working with Disney and started his own animation studio. Like Katzenberg after him with Shrek, you could tell that Don Bluth was putting some of his rebellious feelings towards his former employers into his work. For one, instead of Cinderella or Aurora, the princess in this game looks like this. And she ends up saved by our charmless prince, Dirk the Daring, a clumsy doofus who constantly screws up and gets into trouble, even if you're hammering those buttons correctly. Although, you probably won't be hammering the buttons correctly. Dying is like 70% of the actual fun in this game, at least when you don't have to worry about blowing a buck each time. The death scenes are the best part of the game. Just watching all the crazy ways that Dirk dies, in and of itself, is incredibly entertaining. He gets mangled, strangled, falls to his death, and the folly screams that he makes while this happens are all fantastic. All voiced by Dan Molina. This guy usually does behind-the-scenes work, like editing Planes, Fire, and Rescue. But you might all know him as the voice of Fish out of water from Chicken Little. For as talented as this guy is, he needs better work. It's a shame that Dragon's Lair does tend to be skipped over in many of Don Bluth's retrospectives, because I think it's an important cornerstone in his development as an independent artist. The Secret of Nim is a beautiful film, but it doesn't really hold too many of the cornerstones of Don Bluth's signature style that would be seen in his later work. Besides the more somber and dark tone, obviously. I think Don Bluth's independent style really gets solidified in Dragon's Lair. There's just something aesthetic about this. Something about the usage of color that really gets close to what it would become. And of course, there's the creatures that Dirk the Daring fights. When I think of the Bluth style, I'm thinking of these weird tentacle beasts or the Lizard King. The Lizard King is my favorite part of the entire product. The crazy, bouncy ways that he moves is just incredible. And this must have been mind-blowing at the time, at least for the few people who could get this far. 1983 was in the dark age of animation, albeit the tail end of it. And not counting Ralph Bakshi's work, animation in general at the time hadn't really tried getting this ambitious since Walt Disney had died. I'm not even talking about concept or subject matter, I'm talking more along the lines of budget. Dragon's Lair is super fluid, the animation is wild and frantic, and that is something that you absolutely did not see all too often in the 1980s, at least in the United States. Even in the theaters. Keep in mind, the most recent film that Disney had released at the time was The Fox and the Hound. Personally, I love that film. It's one of my absolute favorites. It's heartbreaking and it's beautiful. However, it's undeniable that Fox and the Hound is a much slower paced film. It's focused on quiet emotions. Still emotions. Like most of Disney's Dark Age films. Put Dragon's Lair in context next to that, what was airing in theaters at the time, or especially what was airing on television. Dragon's Lair comes across as almost like an anachronism, something that was 10 years ahead of its time, which is a fact that's harder for a lot of people to appreciate these days since we have access to all media ever, unless the licensing rights expire and it's removed from Netflix. I do know that Dragon's Lair, even today, does have its appreciators. It's one of the only 3 video games that were brought to the Smithsonian Museum, along with Pong and Pac-Man. although that was more for its technological and cultural importance rather than straight artistic merits, being the first video game ever made with Laserdisc technology. So you might think that I'm talking a little bit crazy, thinking that Dragon's Lair is this obscure hidden gem that no one has ever heard of. But I can't really help but feel this way, especially since today even people high up in the video game industry are talking down its roots. It doesn't help that a lot of Dragon's Lair's legacy was hampered by so many of its god-awful ports. In the 1980s, it was very, very hard to get that beautiful arcade-quality animation on a home console. Even the computer versions at the time didn't do it justice, because the technology simply was not there. People wanted Dragon's Lair at home, and they got Dragon's Lair at home, whatever the fuck this is. Not counting Dragon's Lair 3D, which is a different discussion entirely, there were 4 separate video games all plastered with the name Dragon's Lair, and they're all different to varying levels of accuracy. The one that you probably heard of was the NES version, often called the worst game on a console that has no shortage of some of the worst video games of all time. Dragon's Lair NES was so bad that the angry video game nerd had to review it twice. Beyond that, there was the black and white Game Boy version, which was better, like how getting your thumb chopped off is better than getting your hand chopped off. Then you have the 16-bit version on the Super Nintendo, which it's playable. You can play it like a real video game, although you're probably still not gonna have a lot of fun with it. Just play Castlevania 4. And finally, you have the Game Boy Color version. Despite what you might think, this isn't just a colorized update of the black and white Game Boy version. It's an entirely different game. And if you don't believe me that Dragon's Lair Arcade is this impressive miracle for its time, believe me when I say that the Game Boy Color port of Dragon's Lair is that miracle. Because the Game Boy Color port is just Dragon's Lair. It is the game on the box, the one from the arcade, brought home to you on a portable device. Obviously, the animation is bit crushed to hell and the frame rate leaves a lot to be desired, but like everyone else was saying that it's impossible to put this interactive movie on a cartridge. The technology just wasn't there, and they had to do something stupid instead. When Digital Eclipse just walks in, and they just did it. They just put Dragon's Lair on a Game Boy Color cartridge. Hit the right buttons at the right time, don't die. Watch the movie. And watch the movie. Look at how beautiful some of this is faithfully recreated to the original. If you didn't know any better, you'd have to assume this is part of a reanimated project done by someone who specialized in pixelated animations. The original Dragon's Lair is obviously more visually impressive, but if we're talking technical achievement, the Game Boy Color version of Dragon's Lair elevates this to its own separate work of art entirely. And honestly, I think that any Dragon's Lair collection is incomplete without Dragon's Lair Game Boy Color, because this needs to be seen to be believed. It is an anomaly. The gameplay is still Dragon's Lair, which is unfortunate, but just the fact that this exists, I think is worth the effort of going out of your way to try it out. Or, you know, emulate it, cause right now on eBay, the price is going for $35. And if you blow $35 on Steam, you can get the original Dragon's Lair, Space Ace, and Dragon's Lair 2, with some cash left over to spare. Let's talk about Space Ace and Dragon's Lair 2, starting with Time Warp, because this one has to be talked about. Because Dragon's Lair 2, Time Warp, is batshit insane. Of all the animations that Don Bluth has ever made, Dragon's Lair 2, Time Warp, is the most wild and unhinged of them. And yes, I know his oeuvre. Just watch some of the shit on display.
Kidnapped. I definitely kidnapped again, idiot! You better fight my daughter!
So yes, my reaction to this game is the same as yours. Daphne and Dirk actually fucked between game 1 and 2. Dirk is attacked by his crazy mother-in-law, he takes a time machine and somehow ends up in Alice in Wonderland. The comedy and the expression work is totally on point, and it goes places that you usually don't see animation of this quality go to.
Hang on, brother, don't eat him. Dirk here's our ticket to fame and fortune. Look here, I'll get you the princess when you bring Eve to me.
Yes, that is the snake from the Garden of Eden trying to get Dirk the Daring to find Eve. I don't think I ever saw Disney do something like this. Dragon's Lair 2 is so much better than Dragon's Lair 1, and I am tired of pretending that it's not. I wish I could say the same high praises for Space Ace.
Follow the rocky path! It will take you to the dragon's lair!
Where will the other one take me?
Space Ace!
But I think it's the worst of this trilogy. Dragon's Lair 1 and 2, they felt kind of timeless. I mean, they're totally 1980s. They could have only been made in the 1980s, but they're still timeless, you know what I mean? Space Ace is trapped in the 1980s. In some of the worst ways possible. Now, the animation is still classic. I have no complaints there. It is a very beautiful, vibrant film. However, the writing, and more importantly, the sound direction, kind of kills this experience throughout.
I'll save you, Kimmy! Get me out of here!
In Space Ace, you're helping Dexter. Now, Dirk was cartoonish and over the top and silly. They tried the same thing with Dexter, and they decided to do that by making him nerdy.
Oh! Ah! I've been hit!
By the Infanto Ray.
Which, their idea of that was making him nasally and annoying. So, you have this awful voice every time anything happens. This is painful, and it made dying in the game feel all the worse. I will say though, the backgrounds especially are amazing in this animation. Honestly, this 80s arcade game puts a lot of our modern animations to shame. You wanna know why I was ranting so hard about how space looked in Lightyear? This here, a mid-1980s arcade cabinet that nobody remembers, did space better than Pixar today. It took us a while to get other innovations when it came to getting cartoons in video games. Pretty much anything out there in Dragon's Lair's footsteps was trying to be Dragon's Lair again. QuickTime events set to an animated movie, like Time Gal. As a result, most of them essentially languished in dusty corners of arcades and simply faded into obscurity, because the technology wasn't really there to make the jump anywhere else. Usually. And if you wanted to be big, you had to go where the people were. And in the 1990s, most people that were playing video games were doing it on home consoles. Only the rich kids got PCs that could emulate this animation. And even then, most families only had the one computer. And as I've established, the successful jump from an arcade console to a cartridge was only done once, by magic. Eventually, we did get bigger cartridges that could hold more data, but still, the only animation that would actually fit on them is Shrek at 4 frames per second.
By the order of Lord Farquaad, I am authorized to place you both under arrest and transport you to a designated resettlement facility.
Oh, really? You in what army?
As time went on, games did take a few cues from cinematics, throwing in cutscenes, although at the time they were largely dialogue-based and relatively static. The game changer was compact discs, CDs. With them, you could store multiple times the data. On the PlayStation 1, Final Fantasy took 3 discs to contain everything. On the N64, it would have taken 13 cartridges at least. Of course, games were larger in that generation, but they weren't 13 times the size. So there was plenty of space to spare on these early CD consoles. The PlayStation generally used it for more audio, such as giving the characters voice acting.
Even though I'm a vegetarian, I think you should kill that Yeti. He's pretty tough, though. In fact, I'm not so sure you're up to it.
Off the top of my head, I can only think of one N64 game that uses actual voice acting all the way through.
Oh, no. It's gonna be one of those days.
But that came out relatively late in that console's lifespan. This is compared to the literal hundreds of PlayStation games that have voice acting that you don't think about. Beyond that, the PlayStation and other CD-based consoles with the space to spare ended up being known for full motion video.
No! Don't go!
FMV, because they had the technology to put in full movies. And believe it or not, a lot of them put in the effort to throw in some animation as well.
But I've never seen this type on Earth. I don't know where this energy came from, but cannot let it fall into Dr. Wowie's hands. You must recover all the energy immediately, Mega Man.
But where is Dr. Wily?
That's a good question. We may be able to locate another energy emission from the radar room. When we find that meteor, we'll find Dr. Wowie.
This is the best thing that I've ever seen in my entire life. It's better than Mega Man and Captain N at least. So FMV definitely does have its reputation.
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
My boy.
You can see the problem here, right? In the 5th generation of consoles, they had the technology, but they didn't quite have the discipline. So while they could put in full movies and even full animations, the acting and the writing at the time was largely,
I've been expecting you. It was foretold by gyromancy.
What are you talking about?
I knew you'd come.
You want the girl, right?
The girl? You're talking about Cheryl.
Uncanny? So it didn't matter if the cutscenes were in-engine, live action, or even animation. You got performances like this.
Huh? What? The castle's flying!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world!
Now, if you find nothing funnier than bad dubbing like I do, this whole console is a goldmine for this stuff. But even in an era like this, full of hokey corniness, there is actual quality stuff hidden in the pile. And one I've been wanting to talk about for a long time now is Tail Concerto. Tail Concerto is an underrated gem in a console that has no shortage of underrated gems. Gameplay-wise, it's it's better than Dragon's Lair. But if you're not good at 1990s platformer jank, this game goes from like way too easy to really frustrating halfway through. I still cannot believe that I beat the final boss in this game with this horrendous control scheme. But we're here to talk about animation. And Tail Concerto is very interesting because it sort of gives you the experience of playing through an anime film. It has this adorable concept. It takes place in a world where cats and dogs are basically going at it like cats and dogs. You play as a dog named Waffle, who pilots a mech as he tries to deal with some troublemaking cats. The gameplay is actually very reminiscent of Ape Escape of all things, just once again not as good. But it has a very enthralling world, taking place on a series of floating islands, with each of them getting their own little charm. The story is very much for small children.
Yes. Why? Why does she hate dog people so much?
Because she thinks dog people hate cat people.
Rescue the princess! Can cats and dogs really get along? Also, there's this plot point about the Iron Giant. Like, they call it the Iron Giant actually in the game. And you're either gonna find that extremely distracting or extremely very cool. Now, what Tail Concerto is mostly known for is its cutscenes. I mean, they're 240p because it was on the PlayStation 1, but look at these cutscenes. They put some serious care and quality into what's being shown here. And what really brings Tail Concerto's story to life is the acting, actually.
He was a giant who could reach the clouds. He was born of a man of diminutive stature who had eaten the seeds of wisdom. Iron scraps and a pinch of sand were his womb. His first bath was in a smelter, and his first breath was filled with hatred. His arms touched the clouds, his roar shook the heavens, and his breath froze the land.
I can't believe it! They're flirting with each other! Come on! I want to see too!
Alicia, you shouldn't be spying on them.
I'm watching the enemy! Hey, don't get so close to him, you tramp!
The acting in the game is phenomenal, which, as you might have been able to tell from some of my earlier points, was pretty unusual for the time.
Jill sandwich.
I'd compare the writing here to something on the level of the Pokemon anime. It's silly, obviously, but that's kind of the charm. It's not something you're going to take horribly seriously, but if you really like those kind of cartoons growing up, you will adore this. The characters make this game so unique and special, and not to mention these artful designs. Look at Panta. I mean, look at him. He is just as endearing in the game too. Honestly, if you have a chance, just look at the whole manual here. This was clearly a passion project from CyberConnect, the team that made the game. It has a story where you have a hard time picking your favorite character because just about all of them are great. The bad guy's name is literally Fool. That's his name. His name is Fool. It is that kind of story. And just me mentioning that will tell you exactly if you're going to like this story or not. Cyan is probably my favorite character because he thinks he's this rival to Waffle.
I would like to challenge you to a contest.
Contest?
Yes, that's right. I can't let a cop like you hog all of Princess Terria's admiration.
But all throughout the game, he just keeps stumbling and tripping over himself.
Well, anyhow, this assignment is obviously too much for you. I'll take over from here. Hey! This is quicksand!
Huh?
Don't you see what I'm trying to do? I sacrificed myself to warn you of this trap!
It's just very cute, and the entire game feels like playing through this super kid-friendly anime. And the nearly 15 minutes of actual anime animation really does make this a super unique experience. Like, a lot of PlayStation games had animated cutscenes. Very few of them came to this level. Unfortunately, this particular game hasn't been re-released, and the original is super expensive. It's one of those kind of cult classics. And I have to say, if you did buy a copy of Tail Concerto off of eBay, absolutely none of that money would go to the devs. So, do with that information what you want. However, if you do want to support the developer CyberConnect, Tail Concerto is technically in the Little Bronx series, and those games can actually be bought up Steam, starting with Fuga, Melodies of Steel. And the cover of the game looks like this. So Tail Concerto was about a cat Team Rocket kidnapping a princess and uncovering a silly mystery involving the Iron Giant. Fuga is about 12 children orphaned by a warmongering emperor involving a super weapon that kills someone to use it. And we go from a 3D platformer to a tactical RPG. I've never played any other game in this series, but I have to at some point because this all sounds metal as fuck. Now, if you'd like to see a full playthrough of this game, I'm doing this thing where I live stream gameplays, and as I do, the audience gets to bid with super chats the next game I should play. The highest bid by the time I hit the end of the game becomes the next game we play. And what do you know? Tail Concerto is actually on that list. So if you'd like to see me go through it, why don't you join us one of these Thursdays? So this video is actually supposed to be longer, like twice as long. However, this winter has been particularly harsh on me. A lot of mental health stuff and physical stuff. Got sick a lot. I was struggling through to get this full video done, but then my hand was like, no, and decided to feel like it was an explosive pain. It's on its way to getting better now, but I decided this was a good length for the first video of the year. It's about 25 minutes, and it'll give me enough time to get myself all rested up. You probably wouldn't have even noticed that this is a part 1 out of 2 if I didn't tell you. It's a blessing in disguise anyway, since now I'll be able to give more attention to the other video games that I want to talk about. It might be a couple of weeks before you see that vid either way. Anyway, while some of the gameplay footage in this video was stuff that I had lying around, most of it does come from long plays, and you should be seeing who did what as I'm rambling on now. You long players out there are the true heroes. I should also note that I have played through the games that I'm talking about, even if it isn't using my footage. It would have delayed this video even further if I were to be the one who captured all the footage myself. Anyway, I will see you in part 2.